Here we go. Hello, hello everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome to the virtual book launch of the book As Glenn Can Be, which is illustrated by Nancy Vo, who we will be meeting shortly. You are joining us here at the Coburg Public Library for this book launch, and we are so happy to have you. Today, you will remain muted. If you would like to ask a question, simply raise your hand like this on the camera, or you can go to the reactions button below and raise your hand there and I will unmute you. You can also put your questions in the chat. You can find the chat below in your menu as well, and we'll be happy to answer them. Today, we are meeting with Nancy Vo. She is an illustrator and picture book maker. She lives in Canada and is joining us from British Columbia today. She lives with her husband and 2 children and has put together a number of books. This one being her most recent book, As Glenn Can Be. She also has a trilogy of picture books, with The Outlaw being the first one, and The Ranger being the second one. And the third one is coming out in 2024, which is called The Runaways. And my personal favorite that I'm very looking forward to seeing is a book called Boobies, and it's all about birds. And that book is coming out in August. So keep your eyes peeled. We're going to have it here in our collection at the Coburg Public Library. So without further ado, here is the book As Glenn Can Be. It was written by Sarah Ellis and has been illustrated by Nancy Vo. And we are reading this book today with permission from the publisher, Groundwood Books. As Glenn Can Be. A solo chair. Glenn is a boy who knows what he likes. Looks like they're listening to CBC radio there. How Canadian. Glenn likes boats. He roars around the lake singing at the top of his lungs, one hand on the tiller and one hand conducting an orchestra he hears in his head. Glenn likes boats, but he does not like fishing. He feels sorry for the fish. Glenn likes fun. He likes puns and pranks, funny hats and funny voices, and pretending to play duets with his dog. He sings to cows in a field and elephants in a zoo. Glenn likes fun, but he does not like bullying. If somebody starts to make fun of somebody else, he refuses to join in. Glenn likes nature. Trees in a mist, trees covered with snow, trees making shadows. But he does not like being cold. He likes to be bundled up. He wears a coat, scarf, cap, and gloves, even in summer, even when he goes to the beach. I think I would get too hot with a hat at the beach. Glenn likes the company of animals. He loves his dog Nikki, his rabbits, his goldfish, his budgie, and his skunk. But he finds people more difficult, especially in groups. He does not like parties. Look at all those animals. Would you have a skunk as a pet? Glenn likes reading and learning. He likes his brain to be busy. He can doodle, talk, listen to the radio, and memorize music all at the same time. Wow. But he does not like school. School is boring, and the other kids say he's weird. There he is at school. It looks like he's daydreaming. Glenn likes rules. The rules of games and puzzles, the way that math works, the patterns in music, but he does not like rules that squash him. His parents make a rule that he can only practice piano for 4 hours a day. Glenn hates this rule. He hates this rule because he likes to play the piano. No, Glenn loves to play the piano. He loves it more than anything. It's as exciting as fast boating. It's as fun as solving a really hard puzzle. It's a way of saying what he wants to say without using words. Playing the piano is when Glenn gets to be totally and completely Glenn. He looks so at peace playing piano there. People like to listen to Glenn play. No, they love to listen to him play. Glenn's music makes them feel big feelings, sad or happy, loved or lonely, quiet or full of beans. In New York and Moscow, in Toronto and Tel Aviv, in Leningrad and Los Angeles, they flock to his concerts. They say fabulous and amazing, and they wonder if he's a genius space alien. They cheer him in the street, but after a while, Glenn does not like giving concerts. Sometimes the concert hall is too cold. Sometimes he doesn't like the piano there. Sometimes he doesn't feel well. And people are a problem. They cough and sneeze and blow their noses. Oh, germs. They whisper and crinkle the paper from their candies. Noise. And then they applaud. No, Glenn does not like applause. He would like people to just sit in silence after the music is finished. But nobody wants to sit in silence. They want to clap their hands and stamp their feet and yell, bravo! What can Glenn do? So Glenn doesn't like playing music for people. That's really interesting. Finally, Glenn finds the answer. In an empty concert hall, Glenn makes music for an audience that isn't there. Interesting. In that hall, Glenn plays the music over and over and over again. Then he listens to the recording and makes changes. Not too fast and not too slow. Not too loud and not too quiet. Not too jumpy and not too smooth. There's nobody to please but himself. He plays all night. He plays until every note is just so. This is his perfect place. No buts about it. So Glenn prefers to play his music in a quiet space and record it just the way he wants it. Right at this moment, right now, somebody is listening to Glenn Gould. They're listening to him play the piano. They're either running or resting, reading, waiting, working, burping a baby, staring at the stars. Somebody somewhere is loving the music of a boy who found a way to be completely himself. as Glenn can be. And that is the end of As Glenn Can Be, written by Sarah Ellis and illustrated by Nancy Vo. Thank you to Groundwood Books who let us read this today. So we have some people who just joined us. Welcome, friends. I am now going to pass it on to Nancy herself, who illustrated this beautiful book, As Glenn Can Be. And she's going to talk about what it's like to be an illustrator and what she did to put this book together. For those of you who missed the story, don't worry, we're recording this Zoom session today, so you'll be able to watch us read this story on YouTube. You can also check out the book at the library to read it for yourself, or if you want your own copy, our local bookstore, Let's Talk Books, has some on hand that you can buy. So without further ado, here is Nancy Vo, our illustrator.
Hello, thank you, Lexi. That was a very good reading. I am in Vancouver, BC, so I just wanted to say I'm very happy and fortunate to be living and working on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. So I'm going to start by telling you a story of my own about how I came to getting As Glenn as Can Be as a project. So it was April 2020. And I don't know if when you guys go back in your memory banks, you probably remember what happened in March. That was the middle of the pandemic. So when Groundwood Books sent me the manuscript from Sarah Ellis, it came like this in an email form, and I looked at it and looked around my little 960 square foot condo and said, yes, I'll do it. It was a good way to distract myself during a time when there were no cars on the street, coyotes were roaming, in my neighborhood. So I started doing some research, and then I realized Glenn Gould, he's a famous pianist. I don't even play music. I have no idea how to read notes. I thought, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. So I contacted the publisher, Nan, and said, Nan, I don't know if I'm the right person to do this job, because maybe you need somebody who understands music a bit better and they can bring it to life in a way that befits Glenn Gould. And the following day, she wrote back and said, Nancy, we trust your research skills. So I thought, okay, all right, here's a challenge. So this is the other thing about the pandemic. Sadly, the public libraries were closed, so I couldn't even go out and borrow books. So I went online and I found, I was able to find some things online, but I ended up buying a lot of books. So I started with this little pile here, and eventually, as you do on Google, you go down all kinds of rabbit holes. You end up with way more research, and it was great. It was great because it helped me get into who was this person named Glenn? Who is Glenn Gould, basically? So we have him as a child when he was being taught by Albert. This is in his 20s, and I call it his glamour shot because this is when he suddenly becomes very famous at the age of 22. Yes, perfect, Lexi. And this is him in I'm guessing that's his car, Longfellow. So he's doing a lot more filming as well. So that's what made him also special, because he was not just a pianist. He was a true creator. He would do films. He would do radio broadcasts. He would do plays. So he was this all-around kind of Renaissance guy. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. But it wasn't until I heard an interview on CBC by this guy, James Rhodes, and He came to Canada. He's from the UK, and he had a very good story. It was kind of sad actually from his childhood, and he said Glenn Gould saved his life. And for me, that was like, oh, it's not just a famous person. Something about Glenn Gould moved somebody to say he saved his life. And he said he was in an institution when he heard a song that a friend managed to tape for him, and he was listening to the music and lost himself in it, and very much in the way that Glenn kind of loses himself in the music. And Sarah, the author, when I talked to her about why was Glenn so inspirational for you, she said it was because he found a way to be himself and then to also share that with the world. And wow, I kind of landed on a really special project here. So I started to go into thinking about how do I present these as drawings, because if I just draw exactly what she wrote in her words, I don't think I'm doing my job as an illustrator. So I was trying to find another layer to add. And in the research, I realized Canada kind of came of age at the same time that Glenn Gould did. So I don't know if you can see that, but this is, if you go a little bit west on Lake Ontario from Cobourg, that would have been the Toronto skyline, 1932. This is kind of 1980s. Glenn Gould lived from 1932 to 1982, so he was 50 when he passed away. This year, 2022, marks his 90th anniversary, so people that are very into Glenn Gould's music are having all kinds of celebrations. You can go and look up the Glenn Gould Foundation. You'll find all sorts of information. So I realized, oh, well, here's an opportunity. And other things like, okay, here's his house right now. It's still there. It's in the beaches. This is 32 Beechwood Drive. This is what it looked like in the 1930s. So it hasn't really changed that much. Some things change and some things, I guess, stay the same. This image, I don't know if you are familiar with Toronto's kind of the waterfront. This is the R.C. Harris water treatment plant. So it's a very nice Art Deco building. People travel there just to take pictures of the outside. But in the year that he was born, that was what they were doing. They were starting construction of the R.C. Harris water treatment plant. And you can see this is a crane, but the crane is being pulled by horses, and it looks like it's a steam run. So that was a very fascinating find. And it was also the height of the Great Depression. So you can imagine people were struggling. They were out of work. Gould was also born the same year that CBC launched. So that's why we have that little logo in the front. And we had to get permission to put the recording that came out probably around the time he was like 7 years old, announcing that Canada was at war. So CBC radio was our first national radio broadcast. And you have to remember that before this, public radio was not allowed for civilian access. It was something that they had as a technology from World War I, and back then they thought, no, we can't quite share with the public. So Canadians would steal signals, on their short wave radios, short or long, I can't remember, from the USA, because they were a little bit faster about getting that technology. So I thought, wow, there's a way to anchor it. So if you look at the first end papers, you can see these look like just telephone poles, but it was more to symbolize that here is a way that this vast country of ours, Canada, could finally connect. And you just have to even look at a map of Canada to realize how big we are as a landmass, but we're kind of very spread apart. Like if you drove an hour in any province, you wouldn't be out of your province, most likely, unless you were, at its borders. But say in other countries, you could take a train in 1 hour and you're in another country. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal to have a national radio network, and Glenn grew up with that. So imagine the things he would have been exposed to, listening to music. Yeah, that sort of helped me think about, okay, I can add that layer into it. And then there were, like just figuring out, this is just a paper map that I bought while I was doing my research, and it just pinpoints, okay, this is where he lived, and this is where he spent most of his working life. And so I don't know if other people do that kind of research, but it just really helps me get into thinking about how he might do things and what settings might be appropriate to illustrate. And then and you'll see, okay, these aren't really all lined up properly, but going down that rabbit hole, you'll see like, oh, here's this way. This was a brochure that was handed out during the Second World War. This is the first time we have national television, and Glenn Gould is featured as one of its first performers. And yeah, so that was like, wow, okay, that was interesting too. And then finding out things like this. You're all familiar with the flag at the very top. That's our Canadian maple leaf, but we didn't always have that flag. Between 1921 to 1965, we had what was called the Red Ensign. And basically, this is the British flag. And we had our little coat of arms here. It's because Canada was considered part of the Dominion. And so by the time we were no longer part of the Dominion, that wasn't until much later. And we, but it happened during Glenn's lifetime. So it's like, okay, here's another piece I can add. So I started to do what we call in publishing thumbnails. So because the words are already written, I didn't have to do any of the homework there, but I could start figuring out how to lay out the drawings for the book. So thumbnails are basically your small versions of the drawings that you're going to propose to do. And they're usually done in black and white. You can see I have little notes here. And it lets the publisher know what you're planning to do, how you plan to break up the pages, and the composition. And it's very handy because you don't have to spend an enormous amount of time doing the drawings. They kind of come together quite quickly, and they can make suggestions for changes that are easier to do at this stage. So I sent this in, and we made some changes. And I had to come up with a cover. So the cover, my first cover, was like this. It's basically his car, Longfellow. And the art director said to me, well, if you just picked up a book with a car, you wouldn't know it was about Glenn Gould. Can you put in some piano keys and somewhere, and like maybe make a shadow somewhere? And it wasn't working. So we thought, okay, there's got to be a different solution. I really like the car because I don't usually draw cars. I thought that's a good car. So then I came up with the idea of, okay, maybe something like him at his childhood home. So I did this is my background in architecture coming out. You can see the house again. Let me see. Ooh, there we go. That's the same photo I showed you. And I had to go online and do a little bit of a Google map walk to find out what the other houses were. One of these is already torn down, so I had to go back into reference photos to find out what it was. So there's the, okay, let's go like this. I love doing this part. That's the finished drawing. So that is, that's what they ended up using for the cover. And just to make sure, because I know that my audience is not just kids. My first two books, they just said, these are children's picture books. And, you know, even though I don't quite believe that it's just for children, I know that there's also a special audience in Glen Gould, because there are people who, I think there are two of you who are piano players in this crowd. So there's a special crowd that knows and appreciates Glen Gould, and they may be adults as well. So I signed up onto the Glen Gould Facebook group, and I got feedback on my drawings. So normally I would go to just my critique group and say, okay, what do you think of this drawing? And they're picture book illustrators, but the Glen Gould group had very specific feedback. The first drawing I put up was an image of Glen Gould playing the piano. And I got comments back like, oh, this isn't working. This isn't, you know, this isn't how he looks. So they have very specific ideas about how Glen should look. So I was able to say, okay, well, what do you think he should look like? And it's like, okay, shorter eyelashes. So, so there was a little bit of that back and forth, which was quite unusual in the process. But then this one was the best. I posted the drawing of the house, what I proposed for the cover. And my thing was, find two things related to gold in this drawing. And within less than an hour, one of the Gouldians said, 1, Gould playing at home, 32 Southwood Drive, was Glen Gould's childhood home. 2, if you consider the birds as notes, you have the beginning of the aria, Bach variation. So that guy nailed it. That was the level of involvement I had on social media with Gouldians. So in the industry, we have a term called Easter eggs. And I was able to plant a lot of Easter eggs. Now, Lexi read to you the story, but I'm going to show you some things that you may or may not have noticed right off the bat. So, okay, here's the cover, but we have something called a cover reveal. So when you take off the jacket, you can see they saved my original cover. In a way, it's kind of nice because what happens is this is Glen in his childhood home. This is Glen when he's probably in his 40s driving his car. So you get that the span of his life. And then with the end papers, you have the same thing. You have the kind of the radio, telephone wires, and then you have this was the back end papers. And what this is, we're going to do a quick drawing of it later. Not so quick, but that's the Voyager. The Voyager, there's two of them. They were satellites that were launched in 1977. And 1977 is a long time ago. Most of you weren't even born, I bet. But basically, they took 2 gold records and had recordings of greetings in different languages. They also had Glen Gould playing 2 pieces, plus other music, but it's on this disc. And I think there were images as well. So hoping that if some other life form out there would find this, they would know a little bit about what Earthlings are about. And just as an update, the 2 Voyagers are still out there. They just left the solar system. I think it was 2018, 19. I'd have to look it up again, but they're out there and they've said like certain parts have failed, but they're still out there. And the other thing about it that was fascinating, well, if you think about it, 1977, you guys all have little smartphones by now, I'm sure, or you've seen them. If you think about a computer and how it's evolved, in 1977, our computers were in massive rooms. We put what we call punch cards in, and that would be the code that you fed instructions into this computer, which was a room. And so imagine, coming up with the technology to launch satellites into space, and here we are now. And I think Gold would have loved the technology that we have right now, because he was way ahead of the curve when he was suggesting, oh, I don't want to do recordings. I don't want to perform. I want to do recordings because that will let me make the music the way I like it. So yeah, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a quick drawing demonstration, and this is the part where Lexi gets to field Q&As from the audience.
Before we get to the drawing, I want to share one of my favorite Easter eggs in this book. So a treasure that Nancy put in one of the pages here was done in a transfer, right? You call it a page transfer?
Oh yeah, the text transfer.
The text transfer. So on this page where Glenn is fishing, we see that Nancy has created a bunch of movement in the water with the text transfer. And if you look really, really closely, you can even see that she's put in Lake Simcoe, and there's even the Georgian Bay in here. So kudos to you, Nancy, for doing your research and for getting all of the local treasures in here, making it really special. Now, you had told me something about the fish as well. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this is Lake Simcoe, and I know that they have emerald shiners, all those little fish, and then they also have yellow perch, those two bigger guys, and they are chasing the emerald shiners. And then my daughter was looking at this drawing and said, "Can you put my fish in there?" So that's Lenny. Lenny doesn't actually live in Lake Simcoe. Lenny is a freshwater platy.
That's okay. So we like Lenny. Lenny can stay there.
Yeah. So there are a few other, I should probably just show you the other Easter eggs because I almost forgot about that. On this page, where I showed you the R.C. Harris water treatment plant, you'll see the same technique used with the lettering. And if you read it backwards, it says, "In the skin of a lion."
Oh, and what is that?
So that's a novel that's written by the Canadian author Michael Ondaatje. And Michael Ondaatje is a Golden Booker Prize winner of The English Patient. But my favorite book of his is actually In the Skin of a Lion, because it was set in the same time period, the 30s, in Toronto.
Yeah, you have all of these magical things, like especially the page with the radio, right? That's where we see that, oh, they're listening to CBC radio. And some of you might listen to CBC radio at home as well, or mom and dad, or your parents, or your grandparents listen to CBC radio. And you had also done research specifically about the television. Where is that? Where we see Glenn Gould playing on the television here.
Oh, yeah. So that television was a television that they built and sold from Quebec. So another bit
So it's another cool local Canadian treasure. And is this the piano picture of Glenn that you were talking about that you got feedback from all of our Glenn Gould fans? That is so remarkable that you were able to reach out and connect with his fans in that way. That's really magical.
Yeah. It's one of those moments where you're like, okay, I can run away from this and just like totally ignore it. But I have this lesson that I learned from one of my bosses, at my day job. And I used to be really stressed out before meetings because I would like have everything all prepared, and I think like, what if I totally bomb this meeting? And he was the kind of boss that wasn't going to placate you. He wasn't going to say, "Oh, don't worry, Nancy, you're not going to bomb this." He'd look me straight in the eyes and say, "What if you do?" So I'd sit there thinking, okay. He says, "You got to grab the problem and deal with it." Right there. So there was like a lot of pressure. So I kind of learned from him how to handle those situations.
Yeah, and you certainly did. I mean, the little treasures you put in here, from the cover spread that represents Glenn's neighborhood, to the car underneath, to the fish and the radio. It really feels like a Canadian treasure, just like Glenn is. And if you would like to listen to some of Glenn's music, there's of course YouTube, but here at the Cobourg Public Library, we also have some of his music on CD, and we have other resources about Glenn Gould, including a concert on DVD if you're interested in viewing that. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what got you into illustrating in the beginning before we get to your demo.
Okay, what got me into illustrating? So this is like, if we're talking about picture books specifically, I came about it quite accidentally, because that was one of the questions that the kids yesterday asked, like, did you do this by accident? It's like, yes, I did. So
sounds like a great accident.
Yes, I trained in architecture and I work in planning, but then I had, my children are teenagers now, but 14 years ago, I had what they would call a colicky child, which means she just cries all the time. You could change her diaper, feed her, whatever. She was just not happy. She'd throw herself on the ground in the middle of a grocery store and just start wailing. So, you know, I was the mom that people would point at saying, oh, just don't quite have it together, do you?
That doesn't feel good.
No, it doesn't feel good. But from her, you know, from her perspective, I thought she must see things quite differently. So to cope, I started making these drawings. And before long, I had this little tiny picture book. And so I'll give you an example. It starts out like this. Hi, you know, my name is Ella. I'm the smallest in my family, but I have a big job to do. The next page, you see just a mouth. Wide open, and then kind of a speech bubble with a fire engine going off. And it's like, I wake everyone up in the morning.
That is
so
a big
it kind of
job.
had that tone, and it was like, okay, that's probably how she sees the world. Or when she yanks the, you know, the electrical cords, she's like, oh, if I pull this string, I get to go into my jumper.
Oh,
So that book never got published. It's what we in the industry we call it the trunk book. So you make that first book, and everybody looks at it and says, "That's nice. Okay, now go and learn how to make picture books." And yeah, so you file it away in your trunk. And
that's really interesting. You know, it sounds like your experience of putting into images your daughter's experiences growing up really helped you put yourself in Glenn's shoes when you illustrated this book, because the whole message of this book is Glenn really owned who he was, right? He found what he liked, and he found a way to do it in that way, in a way that suited him, in a way that was comfortable to him, in a way that allowed him to thrive and create the kind of music and the quality and caliber of music he wanted to create. So what a journey for you as an illustrator to go from, you know, chronicling your adventures with your daughter to chronicling through beautiful watercolor images, you know, the life of a great Canadian pianist.
yeah, and I remember Sarah asking me once, because we had to do this interview. She said, "Why would you take on illustrating someone else's text when you already do your own writing and illustrating?" And it was really easy for me to answer that. Was I would never have come up with Glenn Gould. Like, I didn't know who he was, and it was a nice puzzle to work out. So yeah.
Yeah, what a concept that is, right? To take somebody else's words and then illustrate them, but not only illustrate a story, illustrate a true story, a true Canadian story.
Yeah, that comes with its own little, you know, I'm gonna blow
it. there's some pressure there, right? But you
Yes.
did a beautiful job with this book.
Oh,
so
thank you.
What are you going to demo for us today from the book?
So I'm going to do I'm going to move so I can see you. You can still see me, and I'm going to move my little bar stool over. I'm going to demo painting the Voyager. So You can see here, I've got, oh, is the camera working?
Yep.
Let me see. There we go. Yeah, I see it. Okay, perfect. If I start moving off screen, just kind of give me a nudge.
Will do.
But I'm going to start with how I would normally draw. So just have a pencil here. It's not that fancy. It's just it's one of these things called the lead pointers. So I'm going to give it a bit of a sharpen. And my reference image is right here. I have two of them in case I need to see something that's not on one. I'll just very quickly map this out like so. Just move that out of the way. Oh, there's. If I get it at the same angle, it's a bit easier to draw too. Okay. So I use a technique that's uses Biscuit Film, and what it does is, and I'm not doing it yet, but I will show you later, is in watercolor, you can mask out pieces that are parts of the drawing that you don't want to have paint. And I know watercolor artists have asked me, well, why don't you just use masking fluid? And my answer is like, oh, I didn't even know it existed back then because I stumbled on the Biscuit Film by accident when I was trying to figure out how one of my favorite illustrators, John Klassen, makes his drawings. He has these very clean edges. So I had to figure a way to mask things that would leave a very clean edge.
So was the whole book done just with watercoloring?
Like this. So I don't have to draw everything because what I know I'm going to do later is I'll go back in with the white pen, but I just want to mask the pieces that are really, let's see, like the really solid pieces, and those will become white. So I'll show you what Biscuit Film looks like. Okay, so it comes in a tube. And it's not intended for watercolor usage. It's labeled as a supply for airbrush artists. So they like this because it adheres to surfaces like metal, I guess. And it's another version of it is also quite stretchy. So they can, if they're say airbrushing a helmet or something, they will wrap the entire thing on top of the helmet and it curves. Mine is just the flat version, and I don't need very much of it, so I might just lop it off right here. And I did a demo this morning that bled through, so I'm going to use a ruler here and really push the Biscuit onto the paper. One of the questions I get asked is, what kind of paper are you using? Because there are usually members in the audience who do a little bit of watercolor themselves. And my watercolor paper isn't fancy. It's not even watercolor paper. I tested out watercolor papers like the ones that have the textured surfaces. They usually don't work so well because the Biscuit will peel and rip the paper. So I'm using something called Stonehenge, and it's what we used to use in art school. It's the least fancy of the fancy papers. And it's good for multiple media. So I could use pencil and go back in it with a little bit of watercolor, and it seems to hold up. The other paper I found I can use is called Arches. And it's not even the fancy cold press, it's the hot press because it has a similar smooth surface. This took me a while to figure out how much pressure to apply so that I'm actually cutting through the film and not cutting up paper. You can imagine there were several drawings where I just ended up with holes in the paper. So hopefully I've managed to get these right. All right, so now we're going to peel without peeling the bits that are meant to stay on. Oh, I didn't quite get that piece yet. There we go. Are you seeing this coming off? Might be hard to see because there's not much contrast.
Yeah, it's a little tough to see, but you can bring it maybe forward afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Lexi. There, okay. So I'll hold it up for you after.
That is so interesting. I feel like I would cut right through every time.
You throw away enough drawings and you kind of get the hang of it. So that's what it looks like.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's the pieces that got cut out. And now, okay, I'm going to just take my headbud off for a second. Got my messy painting surface because I don't want to mess up everything else. Okay. All right, so I have watercolor here. This one is indigo blue, and it's one of the darker blues. It's one of my favorite colors. I used it in, I would say almost every single picture book except for the last one. Oops, I missed a step here. I'm gonna use the other brush to take care of that. So I need to make a wash. The reason I wet the entire sheet of paper is that way you don't get parts of the drawing with too much of the watercolor soaking in. It kind of lets the watercolor behave as watercolor should, kind of sitting on the water and then moving where it needs to move. And I'm not even treating this like watercolor. Somebody said, your work is, you know, like it looks more like you could have just used gouache. They may be right, so I might try that in another book. Okay, so
as Glenn Can Be, was the whole book created just with watercolor?
Yeah. So most of the picture books I've done are just watercolor and with the acetone transfer and some pen and ink. Not much more than that. The only one that's different is the fourth book is Boobies. It's all done in acrylic. And there's a story around that too, because it started life as a 100% watercolor book. And when I was getting my rejection letters, there were two comments that were coming back. The first one was, we can't touch this topic. And the second comment was, we're not so sure about the style. So I couldn't really do anything about the first. If they couldn't touch the topic, I couldn't really do anything about it. But if I could change the style, then I was open to looking at it a different way. So partway through that whole submission process, I decided to remake the book entirely. Oh, I can see it already leaking through. So that part is the leaking. At this point, I probably would throw it out and start with a new sheet. But I just want to demonstrate kind of how I'm working. I'll move this over a little bit. Are you able to see that?
We can't see the satellite.
Over.
There you go.
You move the satellite over this way. yeah, so now we just let the paint dry. And I'm going to just show you the cover of the book that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so this is Boobies. It's not even a book yet. This is actually the first mock-up. And it was done by taking stencils, like just cut out of paper. And then I'm using a roller with acrylic paints and making, so this requires a different kind of planning, because you're looking at you do a rough drawing, and then you have to plan what colors. So the first thing that goes on is the background, because you have to put stuff on it. Like you do the ground first, and then the feet came, then the body. So you have to plan what order to cut your stencils and apply your paints. But it was quite fun. It was quite liberating because it was way less fussy than the first version. You can see the first version is watercolor, and maybe that was part of it, because this is a bit too real and weird, and this is like, oh, that's comical. So yeah, sometimes style and medium matter.
Oh, I love it. And we're going to get the book Boobies here at the Coburg Public Library in August. So stay tuned for that. And that's a book all about birds, right?
Yeah. Birds, all kinds of animals. Yep. So now I let it dry. And while it's drying, I can take more questions, or I can start demonstrating with an older drawing how I will handle it once it's dried. Why don't I do that? So yeah, if questions come up, I'll just deal with it then. Oh, okay. So I have a version right here. That's the actual drawing, isn't it? Okay, yes. So we have one that, reached a similar stage, and I just took off the frisket. So I'm basically going in and peeling it back. Maybe I can do that here just to show you what it looks like. So I take a tweezer, grab one of the edges. When I peel it away, if I had done it correctly, it would be all white right there. But this is where the white pen comes in handy. So I'm part of this illustrating, or a group on Facebook called Inked, or Inktober. I can't remember which one, but we all compared notes and decided this is a good white pen because it actually makes things white that you need white. So I'll go in and start putting in the lines I need to put in for the satellite. Just to give it some form and give it some shadow. And I'll show you what it looks like when you start drawing with this. So you want the same line again here. This comes, oh, there's a piece that didn't come off before. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to go like this and make that piece come all the way across here. I kind of like using a ruler every once in a while because it takes me back to my old drafting days. But it's also nice because, like, when you have something as loose and fluid as watercolor, you have a contrast between something that's crisp and controlled versus something that's loose.
So we have a
Yeah.
question here. Go ahead and unmute yourself there, and you can ask your question.
What and then your favorite part about doing the book? What is your favorite part about doing the book?
What is my favorite part about doing the book?
Nothing.
I kind of really like, there's always one drawing that I get stuck on, like really stuck on. And when I solve that, that's the best feeling in the world. So I'm talking to Ted, is that right? Hi, Ted. I'm going to show you the second book in the series called The Ranger. So I didn't, I had so much trouble with the image that would fit this scene. And it's the scene where Annie's decided she's going to free the fox from its leg hole trap. So the page before, you have this. You have the fox looking up at her and is very vulnerable, but doesn't know who she is, and it's probably kind of snarly. And the original image I had for that next page was not this. It was a close-up of her trying to undo the trap. But the publisher said, you know, is that really how traps get, you know, unhooked? And I had to watch some really, really gruesome YouTube videos about how you free an animal from a trap. It's like, oh, okay, that's really graphic. But how can we convey a similar sort of tension without being so graphic? And I was working in the studio, and somehow we were talking about movies. And then I remembered this movie poster by the Coen brothers. It was called Miller's Crossing. And I had not seen the movie myself, but I remember the movie poster, and it's a picture of the woods, and there are two men. One is kneeling on the ground, begging for his life, and the other guy, I'm assuming, is the gangster. And that emotion that it pulled forward was is almost as powerful as what I was trying to express here. And I realized why that poster was effective. They moved the horizon line above your point of view. And so I did that. I just kind of changed it, and it was
Yeah, and you did that a little bit in the first book as well, right? On the cover page with Outlaw, the horizon is just up a bit. So Outlaw is the first book of the trilogy that Nancy Vo just spoke about, and Ranger is the second book, and the third one, Runaway, is due to come out in 2024.
Yes. Yeah, so I know we're getting really close to the end of our time, so basically I will let you help me sign off, and
All right.
thank you for having me.
So thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us here at the Coburg Public Library. It was a pleasure to have you all with us this evening, and it was remarkable to go through your journey of as Glen could be, through your research spirals, to your tableaus, to the Easter eggs you put into this Canadian treasure. It is a joy to behold. So you can check out your copy of As Glen Can Be at the Coburg Public Library. If you would like to purchase the book, our local bookstore, Let's Talk Books, has some copies for you to purchase. We also have in our collection here at Coburg, music from Glenn Gould and a documentary on him if you would like to learn more. Well, without further ado, have a wonderful evening, and I hope that some music from Glenn Gould can relax you all this evening. Thank you, Nancy, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.